Hi, I'm Linda, and I'm 69. Tonight, I learned a lesson I never expected about love, sacrifice, and invisibility. I gave my son everything I had. I poured my heart into raising him, sacrificing sleep, money, and even my own happiness so he could have a life I never imagined for myself. And tonight, I sat in a grand ballroom with my hands clasped, my heart full of hope, only to watch him turn to someone else and call her his true mother. I keep replaying that moment in my mind, wondering how it all went so wrong. I remember thinking, just for a second, that maybe he would look at me, that he would acknowledge all those nights I stayed awake while he cried, or all the birthdays I stitched together when money was short. But he didn't. And in that moment, I understood something painful and important. I can't describe the mix of shock, sadness, and disbelief. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Yet I had to stay composed, smiling as if everything was fine. Have you ever felt invisible to someone you love the most? That feeling of being present and unseen? I want to take you back to how I got here, to show you the story behind tonight's heartbreak and the choices that shaped me. From the moment I held my son for the first time, I gave him my all. And that's where this journey really begins. The ballroom that night looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, soft light reflecting off perfectly set tables, white roses filling every vase, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a movie, where everything is polished and gleaming. Ethan, my son, looked so handsome in his navy tuxedo, and Claire, his bride, radiated happiness, like she had stepped right out of a dream. But I stayed at a corner table, close enough to be part of the celebration, far enough to be unnoticed. I noticed even the small details, my name slightly misspelled on the place card, and it stung more than I expected. As I watched them, my mind drifted back over the years. I remembered the day Ethan came into my life. 5 years old, small and fragile after the accident that took his parents. I was 22, working long shifts at the hospital. And yet, holding him in my arms that first night, I felt a certainty I couldn't explain. I would care for him, love him, protect him, no matter what it took. And I did. I stumbled. I made mistakes. But I never stopped moving forward. There were nights when he cried and I cried too, missing the mother he had lost, struggling to learn how to be a parent while being so young. I improvised celebrations, built castles out of cardboard, made costumes from old scrubs. Every day was a lesson in love and patience. And slowly, he began to call me Mom, though the word took years to fully arrive. Even after he grew taller, more confident, I kept trying. I remember baking his favorite cake when we could barely afford groceries, singing to him softly to help him sleep, staying up late, helping with homework even when exhaustion pressed on me. And for a long time, it felt enough. I believed the bond we had could weather anything, that the love we shared would be recognized. But then Claire arrived. She was poised, elegant, deliberate in everything she did. And I remember thinking how quickly Ethan seemed to fall under her influence. She never really looked at me, never noticed the traditions I tried to maintain. Over time, I watched him drift away, calls becoming infrequent, invitations passing without a word. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that he didn't realize what he had in front of him. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being edged out, silently replaced, sitting there in the ballroom, surrounded by laughter, music, and the gleam of celebration. I felt the weight of all those years, the small sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the love poured quietly into every day. It was all so visible to me, yet invisible to him. I asked myself, How did it come to this? How could love that shaped a life go unrecognized at the very moment it should have mattered most? And just as my heart began to tighten with anticipation and fear, I knew the next moments would show me exactly how much of me Ethan had carried into this new life, and how much he had left behind. As the evening went on, I watched Ethan and Claire move through the crowd with ease, exchanging laughs and smiles, while I felt the familiar pull of being on the outside. I remembered when he used to run into the kitchen, excited to show me a drawing or a project he had worked on at school. Now, the energy between them was a reminder of how far he had drifted. The calls that once came every Sunday became bi-weekly, then monthly, and eventually only when he needed something. I tried to remind myself that adulthood changes relationships, that distance is natural, but each small absence felt like another brushstroke erasing me from his life. I thought about the mornings when I woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, making sure everything was just right, and the nights when I stayed up waiting for him to come home from a friend's house, praying he was safe. All those years of effort, all those sleepless nights, they didn't seem to matter in this new world he had built. Claire's influence was subtle but firm. She organized every detail of his life, from brunches to business trips, often without so much as a glance in my direction. I wondered if he even noticed the traditions I tried to preserve, the small comforts I had carried over from his childhood. There was the memory of the first time she visited. I had spent hours preparing a meal I knew he loved, arranging the table, and making the house feel warm and welcoming. She had smiled politely, barely touching the food, speaking more about investments and career plans than anything personal. Ethan had hung on her every word, his eyes lighting up as if discovering a teacher he had always needed. That evening, I felt a subtle shift, a quiet warning that my place in his life might be changing in ways I could not yet name. Over the months, I noticed the pattern. The calls grew shorter, the visits less frequent, and suddenly, I was hearing more about Claire's mother than from my own son. I tried to push the growing pain aside, telling myself that maybe it was just a phase, that perhaps he would still remember all the moments we had shared, all the ways I had tried to nurture him. Yet the small moments of exclusion kept stacking up: the unannounced engagement, the decisions made without consulting me, the polite but distant messages about his wedding. Each one felt like a quiet erasure, a reminder that my role, once central, had been reduced to background noise. And then there was the money. Ethan had asked me to contribute to the wedding a modest way, he said, to help make the day special. But the request carried an unexpected weight, a subtle reminder that the love I had poured into his life could be quantified, measured, and taken for granted. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I wasn't just being edged out emotionally, I was being used. My sacrifices now, a resource to be drawn upon, without acknowledgement. Sitting there in the corner of the ballroom, I felt a tightening in my chest, a mixture of sadness, frustration, and fear of what was coming next. Every smile I forced, every polite nod I gave, felt like a mask. I kept asking myself if he would see me tonight, if he would honor the years I had devoted to him, or if this moment would be another proof that my presence no longer mattered. The anticipation gnawed at me, the silence around my table contrasting sharply with the laughter and chatter of the celebration. I realized that the next few moments would not only reveal his gratitude or lack of it, but also show me the truth about where I stood in his life, and in his heart. As I took a deep breath and adjusted my dress, I knew I had to be ready for whatever would come. I reminded myself of the little victories, the early mornings, the countless nights of care and guidance. I held on to those memories, because soon, the moment that defined all my efforts, my love, and my sacrifices was about to arrive. The music quieted, and for a moment, the ballroom seemed suspended in time. Ethan stood, straight and confident, the familiar smile I had known since he was a little boy. My heart raced, hoping this would be the moment he acknowledged all I had done. All the nights I stayed awake. All the birthdays I made magical with whatever I had. But then he spoke in a way that I didn't expect. He turned toward Claire, his bride, and began to give thanks. The words he chose made my chest tighten. The kind of tightness that leaves you breathless without a sound. He spoke of guidance, love, support, and he called her his true mother. My mind froze. I could hear the polite applause, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, but it all felt distant, like I was behind a pane of glass. I realized in that instant that he had erased me from this moment, from this chapter of his life. I felt a knot form in my throat, a weight that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with the absence of recognition. The years of care, of sleepless nights and small, painstaking histories, felt invisible in that moment. And yet, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply took a deep breath and kept my face serene, letting the pain burn quietly inside me. Some hurts are too heavy to show. And I learned long ago that strength is not always in the visible reaction but in enduring with dignity. I remembered the mornings of early school projects, the nights I sat by his bed when he was sick, the countless handmade gifts, and the quiet moments when I held him in my arms. And now, watching him smile at someone else, acknowledging another woman for what I had given unconditionally, I understood how deeply my love had been taken for granted. At that moment, I also realized something else. Something more profound. Love is not ownership. And giving everything does not guarantee recognition or gratitude. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come in silence. And the most painful truths are delivered with the gentlest words. I sat still, a spectator in the life I had built for someone else, waiting for the night to end, knowing that everything had changed, and that the next steps would define who I truly was, beyond the role I had played for so many years. After that moment, I stayed seated, letting the applause wash over the room, while I felt nothing but a quiet ache. My hands rested on my lap, and I watched the flicker of a candle, thinking about the years that had brought me here, the tiny victories of raising Ethan, the small joys of his childhood, the sleepless nights and makeshift birthday celebrations. They all seemed distant, almost as if they had never happened. I realized that the absence of acknowledgement doesn't erase what you gave, but it can make you feel invisible if you've tied your worth entirely to someone else's recognition. I reflected on all those mornings I prepared his favorite meals, the nights I stayed up helping with homework, and the endless ways I tried to make him feel loved. For decades, I measured my value by his happiness, hoping that every act of care would be reciprocated in gratitude. And now, watching him publicly honor someone else, I understood that sometimes love is unbalanced, that giving everything doesn't always guarantee acknowledgement or loyalty. There was anger. Yes, a sharp sting that pressed against my ribs. But it wasn't the kind of anger that demands confrontation. It was deeper. Quieter. A bitter awareness that my devotion had been taken for granted. I thought about all the small moments when I let him slip further away without insisting he see me. When I convinced myself that my sacrifices were invisible, but okay because love should be unconditional. Perhaps, I realized, I had allowed this distance to grow by not protecting my own place in his life. And then, amid the hurt, came a small, surprising clarity. I understood that my worth wasn't bound to Ethan's recognition. It never had been. The love I gave shaped both of us. Yes, but it also shaped me. I had survived alone for so long, raised a child with no help, and created a life filled with care and compassion. That strength, I realized, was mine untouchable, independent of anyone else's acknowledgement. In that quiet reflection, I began to see the first step toward reclaiming myself. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in recognizing that my life could be about me too. I could honor my sacrifices, cherish my memories, and still find peace, even if he did not. And I knew that the next steps I took would define the rest of my life in ways I had only just begun to imagine. The next morning, I woke with a quiet resolve. For years, I had let my love for Ethan define me. And now I realized it was time to define myself. I thought about the savings I had accumulated, the little inheritance from my father, and all the careful planning I had done quietly over the decades. I could choose to continue feeling invisible, or I could reclaim my life and my voice. I decided to make changes to my will, removing Ethan from any future benefits. It wasn't out of spite or revenge, but out of recognition that my love could not be bought or taken for granted. Instead, I redirected my resources into a small foundation for women like me, mothers who had sacrificed for decades without recognition, who worked tirelessly and quietly but were rarely celebrated. That choice, more than anything, made me feel alive again. Packing my belongings from the old apartment, I felt a sense of liberation with every box. This was not just a physical move, it was a symbolic step into a life where my presence, my decisions, and my desires mattered. I chose the furnishings, the colors, the little touches that reflected me, not the expectations of others. For the first time in decades, I felt a home that was fully mine. When Ethan and Claire came to see the new place, I observed their surprise not in judgment, but as a mirror of my own growth. The space, the light, the small details of comfort and beauty, all curated with intention, reminded me of the strength and resilience I had carried silently for so long. I realized that my absence from their life had been temporary in its impact on me, but permanent in teaching me the importance of honoring myself. I also allowed myself to reconnect with old friends, to revisit passions I had put aside, and to embrace the little joys of daily life that had been overshadowed by sacrifice. The heavy weight of invisibility slowly lifted, replaced by a sense of agency and presence I had almost forgotten. I understood that love and care are precious, but they should never erase the person giving them. Even as Ethan and Claire eventually reached out, their voices tinged with hesitation and regret, I felt only calm. The recognition I sought was no longer external, it was rooted firmly in myself. I could acknowledge my own worth, my own accomplishments, and the life I had built despite the challenges. I realized that the most profound peace comes from living authentically, valuing oneself, and allowing others' actions to be reflections, not definitions, of who I am. That chapter of my life had closed, but the story of me strong, present, and fully visible was just beginning. I had learned that the greatest gift is not always to give, but to recognize one's own value and create a life that honors it. And in that understanding, I finally felt whole, calm, and free. Looking back, I see that the hardest lessons often arrive in silence. Losing recognition from someone you've loved and sacrificed for doesn't erase the years of care, but it does force you to face a truth many of us avoid, that your worth cannot depend entirely on another person. I learned that love is not ownership, and giving everything does not guarantee acknowledgement. The most profound change comes when you honor yourself first. In reclaiming my life, I discovered a quiet strength I had almost forgotten. I created space for my own joys, my own routines, and my own presence. I built a foundation to support women who, like me, had given so much without applause. I realized that empowerment isn't about punishing others or seeking revenge. It's about standing in your own value and letting your life reflect that truth. I want those listening to remember that your presence matters, even if others fail to notice it. It is never too late to take care of yourself, to set boundaries, and to cherish the parts of your story that define you. When you start living for your own worth, you invite a life filled with authenticity, peace, and dignity. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or taken for granted, despite everything you've done? I would love to hear your story and connect through shared experiences. Please take a moment to leave a comment. Share this story with someone who might need it. And if it resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing for more heartfelt stories of resilience, love, and family dynamics. Even in moments of heartbreak, we can find clarity, strength, and the courage to step fully into our own lives. And that, I have learned, is the most lasting gift of all.